They sold my car, not behind my back. No, that would have been too merciful. They sold it while I was standing in the same house they believed they owned, the same house I had quietly kept in my name for 23 years. I remember the moment like a cold metal taste in my mouth. My sister's voice echoed from the yard. "Don't tell him. He doesn't need to know. He's barely part of this family anyway." They thought I was powerless. They thought I was the one who needed them. But the truth, the one I carried like a locked box inside my chest, was far heavier than any of them ever imagined, because they didn't know the documents were still in my safe. They didn't know the roof above their heads was still mine, and I didn't tell them. Not yet. The sound of a house I no longer recognized. The morning they sold my car, the house felt strangely silent, the kind of silence that doesn't calm you but warns you. Outside, winter light pressed against the frosted windows, pale and hesitant, as if even the sun wanted nothing to do with what was about to unfold inside those walls. I had lived in that house long enough to recognize the texture of every silence. There was the peaceful kind that arrived after long conversations, the tired kind that followed a family argument, and then this one, sharp, secretive, restless. A silence made of whispers that had already happened. I heard voices in the kitchen, not loud ones, just low, confidential tones that carried the softness of guilt. "Don't tell him yet," my sister murmured. "It's done anyway." My steps slowed. For a moment, I stood there on the staircase, not wanting to descend into whatever truth waited for me. The air smelled like overboiled tea and old furniture-familiar scents that suddenly felt foreign, as if I had stepped into a memory rather than my own home. My brother's voice followed, more careless, almost amused. "He won't need it anymore. When was the last time he even used that car?" We did him a favor. A favor. That word sat in the bottom of my stomach like a stone. I walked into the kitchen. 3 faces turned toward me with the same expression people wear when they've been caught looking into a drawer that isn't theirs. My sister forced a smile, thin and trembling around the edges. "Oh, you're up earlier than usual." I looked at the table. Keys were missing from the hook by the door. A folded envelope lay beside a half-eaten breakfast, and their eyes avoided mine. Not with fear, but with the practiced indifference of people who believe their actions are justified. My brother cleared his throat. "Before you get upset, it was just sitting there. You weren't using it. Someone offered a good price." My mother, stirring cold tea, though she wasn't planning to drink it, added quietly, "We thought you wouldn't mind." They had sold it. My car. Not because it was necessary, not because we had discussed it, but because somewhere along the years they had decided I no longer had ownership over the things I paid for. Ownership. Such a simple word. Such a fragile one, too. Especially in families where boundaries were never drawn and respect had been stretched thin over decades of sacrifice. I didn't raise my voice. Shock has a strange way of making you gentle. I simply asked, "Who gave you the right?" My brother gave a shrug that carried decades of entitlement. "You weren't using it," he repeated, as if that explained everything. They didn't know. They had no idea what else I wasn't using, what else I had quietly held on to while letting them believe it was theirs. The deed to the house, the very floor beneath their feet. My mother looked at me then, properly, directly, and for the first time I realized she didn't see me as the man who had kept this family afloat for 20 years. She saw me as someone who should be grateful for whatever place they allowed him to occupy. "Cars come and go," she whispered. "Family stays." Family. Another heavy word. Another word they liked to bend in their favor. I took the envelope on the table. Inside, it was the receipt. The price was insultingly low, but betrayal rarely respects market value. I folded it again, placed it back on the table, and said nothing. Not about the car, not about the house, not about the truth that could shatter the illusion they lived in. Not yet, because sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes silence is preparation. What people do when they think you're powerless. The day after they sold my car, the house moved with a strange confidence, as if everyone inside it had grown a little bolder overnight. Doors closed harder. Conversations lasted longer. Laughter floated through the halls with a careless ease I hadn't heard in years. People act differently when they believe you have nothing left to defend. My brother walked past me in the hallway, humming. The same man who used to flinch whenever money was mentioned around me now carried himself like a landlord in his own fantasy. My sister brewed coffee in my mother's favorite pot, the one she never let anyone touch. Even she had started taking small liberties, tiny gestures, small shifts, but each one cut deeper than anything they'd said. I sat at the dining table, watching them move through the house as if claiming territory, as if my presence was an inconvenience, as if I was a guest who had overstayed his welcome. My mother finally joined them, wearing the expression of someone who had convinced herself she made the right decisions. She poured herself tea, took her time, and then said casually, "We need to talk about selling a few more things. The house needs repairs." The house? She said it like it belonged to her, like she had earned it, like I hadn't drained half of my 30s trying to keep this roof from collapsing on all of us. My sister nodded. Yes, exactly. We can't keep waiting. If he's not using certain things, why should they just sit there? I looked at them one by one. They spoke about my belongings the way people talk about items in an abandoned building objects without an owner. No shame, no hesitation, only entitlement polished into confidence over the years. My brother placed a document on the table, a list, my things, my property. "This is what we can sell next," he said. "We all need to contribute." All. As if we were equals in effort. As if we had shared the burdens the same way. My mother watched me with a soft, pitying gaze, the kind people give a child who doesn't understand how the adult world works anymore. "You're older now," she said gently. "You don't need all these things. Life moves forward. We need to adapt." Slowly, I leaned back in my chair. They still didn't know. They still had no idea that the papers they wanted to adapt were sitting locked in my safe, that they were drinking tea in a kitchen built on ground that legally belonged to me, that the repairs they were discussing were my financial responsibility on paper because the house, the walls, the wiring, the foundation, everything was still under my name, and I hadn't said a word, not because I was scared, but because I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. My sister folded the list and placed a pen on top of it. "We're a family," she said, "and families make decisions together." Families. That word again. A word they used like a shield when it served them, and a weapon when it didn't. I stood up, walked past them, and headed toward the door. My brother called after me. "Where are you going?" I paused, looked back, and answered with a calmness that unsettled even me. "To watch." "Watch what?" my sister asked. "How far you think you can go?" I said. Then I walked out, closing the door behind me. They didn't know it yet, but the game they had started was about to turn into a lesson none of them would ever forget. The first crack in their illusion. I didn't go far. Just far enough for them to believe I had left the house to cool my head. That was always their assumption, that I needed time, that I needed distance, that I needed them. They never once considered the possibility that I was watching them, evaluating them, measuring the weight of their actions like a man preparing for an audit of his own life. Outside, the winter air carried that sharp, metallic chill that wakes the senses. I stood by the old stone fence, hands in my pockets, listening to the sound of the house behind me. Voices rose, fell, blended. No guilt, no hesitation, only impatience. They weren't discussing my feelings. They were discussing their next steps. I waited 10 minutes, then 20, long enough for them to believe the coast was clear. I walked back toward the house quietly, the way you do when you want truth, not explanations. Through the kitchen window, I saw movement. My sister leaning over the table, my brother pacing, my mother counting something, money, perhaps, or possibilities. The moment I opened the door, silence fell again. Not the soft kind, not the guilty kind. No. This one was defensive, the kind that rises when people have been caught in preparation. My brother forced a smile. "You're back quickly." "I forgot something," I replied. I walked past them toward the living room. Their eyes followed me, curious, uneasy, but not yet afraid. Fear comes later, when consequences appear. For now, they were still bold, still confident in the fantasy they had built. On the coffee table, I saw an envelope I hadn't noticed before. Not mine. It was addressed to my mother, from a bank. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Her expression said enough. She stepped between me and the table almost too quickly. "It's nothing important," she murmured. My sister added, "We're just reorganizing a few things." Reorganizing, such a polite word for desperation. My mother slipped the envelope under a stack of newspapers, but her hands trembled slightly. I recognized that tremble. I had seen it when I was younger. The tremble of someone who owes more than they can admit, who hides more than they can handle. Suddenly, the pieces shifted. They didn't sell my car because they wanted the money. They sold it because they needed the money. The list on the table earlier? The talk of repairing the house? The strange confidence in their voices? It all pointed to one truth. They were planning to use the house for something. Mortgage, loan, collateral. Something big, something risky. And they believed they could, because they believed the house belonged to them. My brother reclaimed his place at the head of the table, as if the seat came with authority. "We need to talk," he said. I sat down opposite them. They expected resistance. They expected questions. Instead, I simply watched. My sister began, her tone rehearsed. "Things are getting more expensive. We can't depend on your income the way we used to. You're getting older, too, and you should focus on yourself. So we've decided—" "We?" I repeated quietly. My mother sighed. That long, heavy sigh she used whenever she wanted to end a conversation before it began. "We're taking control of the household finances," she said. "It's better this way." Better for whom? The question hovered between us. My brother slid the list toward me again. "We'll start by selling things we don't need. Later, we'll think about bigger decisions." Bigger decisions. The house. The property. My name on a deed they believed had expired. I leaned forward slowly. "What exactly are you planning to do with the house?" 3 faces stiffened. 3 pairs of eyes betrayed themselves in the same second. My sister answered too quickly. "Repairs. Just repairs." My brother corrected her. "Maybe renting out part of it." My mother finally whispered the truth. "There's an investment opportunity." "But we can handle it." There it was, the crack in their illusion. They wanted to use the house as leverage. They wanted to gamble with something that wasn't theirs. And they wanted me silent, compliant, grateful. I nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "I see." They exhaled with relief, mistaking my calm for surrender. I stood up, walked to the door, paused, then said something they didn't expect. "Make whatever plans you want." Their shoulders relaxed. "Just remember one thing," I added, turning back. They waited. "You can only make decisions about something you actually own." Their faces changed instantly. A flicker of confusion, then irritation, then something else, something nervous. But I didn't give them the chance to ask questions. I left the room with the same quiet they had once used to corner me. This time, the silence belonged to me. When familiar walls start feeling temporary. By the 4th morning, something had shifted in the atmosphere of the house. The walls were the same, the furniture was the same, but the energy of the place had changed. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was subtle, quiet and heavy in a way only older people truly notice, a kind of tension that settles into the air and follows you from room to room. I woke up earlier than usual, not because I was restless, but because the house felt unfamiliar enough to keep me alert. When I came downstairs, my mother and sister were already in the dining room. They weren't talking. They were waiting. Both looked at me with that polite expectancy people have when they want something but don't yet know how to ask. My brother joined a moment later, carrying a folder under his arm. He placed it on the table carefully as if it contained something delicate. "We've been discussing a few changes," he said. That sentence alone told me more than the folder ever would. My sister opened it and slid several papers toward me. Drawings, measurements, notes. Someone had sketched plans, remodeling ideas, rearrangements, possible renovations. "You've been talking about renovating for years," she said. "We thought it's finally time to do something about it." I studied the papers. The ideas weren't unreasonable, just premature, and made by people who believed they had the right to decide. My mother pointed at one of the plans. "We want to open up the living room, remove that wall, maybe change the flooring. It will add value." Value. Everything somehow came down to value these days. Not memories, not stability. Value. My brother added, "To do all that, we'll need a loan, a small one. The house documents will be necessary, but it's a normal process. People do it all the time." There it was, clearer than ever. They still believed the house belonged to them. They believed they could walk into a bank, hand over papers, sign their names, and restructure the property as they wished. I kept my voice steady. "What made you think you could do all this without asking me?" My brother didn't hesitate. "You live here, but you don't handle anything. You haven't for years. So we're stepping up." Stepping up, that was his phrase. My mother gently pushed the papers closer to me, as if she wanted to soften the blow. "You've always been generous," she said. "We're not taking anything away from you. We're improving the home." Home. They said it like it meant the same thing for all of us. But the truth was simpler. A home is only a home when everyone respects each other's place in it. They no longer respected mine. My sister folded her hands. "We thought you'd support us. But if you want to be involved, you can sign the documents with us. It'll go faster that way." I leaned back in my chair, not out of frustration, but to study their faces more carefully. They weren't trying to hurt me, but they were trying to use me. There's a difference, a smaller one, but a difference nonetheless. "You've already made most of the decisions," I said. "We made plans," my sister corrected. "Plans aren't decisions." My brother nodded. "We don't want conflict, we want progress." Progress. Another word for pressure. I stood up, walked to the window, looked outside at the garden I had spent years maintaining, years they had long forgotten. After a moment, I turned back to them. "You don't have the authority to make these plans." They frowned, confused. My brother asked, "What authority are you talking about?" I paused, letting the question sit in the air. They waited for an explanation, expecting one, but I didn't give it to them. Instead, I said only, "You'll understand soon enough." My mother looked uneasy. My sister looked irritated. My brother looked offended. But none of them looked prepared. Not for the truth. Not for the consequences. Not for the reality they had ignored for too long. I walked out of the room, leaving their plans, their papers, their assumptions behind. For the first time, they began to sense that something wasn't as simple as they believed. For the first time, the house felt less like theirs. And for the first time, I saw uncertainty in their eyes, the earliest crack in their certainty that they were in control. The questions they were afraid to ask for the next 2 days, the house became unusually polite. Not peaceful, just polite. That careful politeness adults use when they're unsure how much you know, or worse, how much you're willing to reveal. My mother knocked before entering rooms. My sister avoided raising her voice. My brother watched me a little too closely, the way someone watches a door they aren't sure is locked. None of them asked the real question. Not yet, but the doubt had started to spread. On the morning of the 5th day, I found all 3 of them in the living room, waiting, again. My brother stood with his arms crossed, shoulders lifted as if preparing for a confrontation. My sister sat with her back straight, her expression firm but anxious. My mother rested her hands on her lap, twisting her fingers in a slow, silent rhythm. "We need clarity," my brother said. That word, clarity, had weight to it. It meant they had finally reached the limits of assumption. My sister took a breath. "You said we'll understand soon enough. That isn't an answer." My mother added softly, "If there's something we should know, we'd rather you tell us directly." I sat down opposite them. "You've been telling me what you plan to do with the house," I replied, "but none of you stopped to ask a basic question." They waited. I continued, "Exactly what makes you believe the house belongs to you?" Their reactions were immediate. My sister frowned. "It's our family home. It always has been." My brother added, "You moved in after Dad died. You helped pay for things, sure, but the house was always part of the family. That hasn't changed." My mother looked away, as if avoiding the truth made it less important. "The documents are here somewhere. They always were." The document they were referring to hadn't been touched in 23 years. I kept my tone calm, almost conversational. "When's the last time you actually saw the deed?" My sister hesitated. "Why does that matter?" "Because you're planning to use the house for a loan," I said, "and banks don't work with assumptions." My brother's jaw tightened. "Are you trying to say the house isn't ours?" I didn't answer. Not immediately. Not because I was unsure, but because their silence told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't checked. They hadn't verified. They had simply believed. After a long pause, my mother spoke again, her voice quiet. "The house was in your father's name." "Yes," I replied. "It was." She swallowed. "But he intended it for the family." "I know what he intended," I said, "and I respected that. I still do." My brother snapped. "Then what's the problem?" I looked at him directly. "The problem is that intention and legality aren't the same thing." That sentence stopped all 3 of them. My sister leaned forward. "What are you saying exactly?" I reached into my jacket and placed a single sheet of paper on the coffee table. I didn't push it toward them. I didn't explain it. I simply let it sit there. A legal copy of the deed. My name on it. Clear. Official. Undisputed. My brother stared at it without touching. My sister blinked several times as if the text would rearrange itself into something more convenient. My mother lifted a hand to her mouth. I kept my voice even. "This house has been in my name since the year after Dad died. He arranged it that way. I didn't change anything. I simply left it as he said it." The room went completely still. My sister finally whispered, "You never told us." "You never asked," I answered. My brother shook his head. No, that can't be right. Dad wouldn't do that. He wouldn't put all of us in a position where we depend on you." "He didn't," I replied. "He put all of us in a position where someone had responsibility, someone he trusted." My mother's voice cracked. "He never said a word about this to me." "He did," I said quietly. "You just refused to talk about legal things while he was sick, so he handled it alone." All 3 of them sat frozen in a silence more honest than anything they had said all week. My sister finally spoke, not with anger but with confusion. "So what now?" I stood up. "Now," I said, "you stop making plans for things you don't own. No shouting, no revenge, just truth, delivered in a way they could no longer avoid." As I left the room, I heard my brother mutter under his breath, "This changes everything." He was right. It changed everything for them. For me, it only clarified what I had known for years, the shift in their tone. The day after they saw the deed, the house became a different place entirely. Not quieter, just more careful. Every conversation seemed edited before it reached my ears. Every glance lasted a second longer than normal, as if they were trying to read my intentions and failing. My mother approached me first. She knocked on my door even though it had never been locked. When I opened it, she stood there holding a cup of tea with both hands, like a peace offering. "I made this for you," she said. I accepted the cup, not because I needed tea, but because turning it down would only lead to more conversations. She stepped inside slowly, her posture changed. There was none of the authority she carried before, only uncertainty. "I didn't know your father put the house in your name," she said quietly. "If I had known, things would have been different." "That's why he didn't tell you," I replied. "He didn't want the house to become an argument. He knew you were dealing with enough already." She nodded, not disputing it. She couldn't. She remembered those days well. The exhaustion, the appointments, the stress that swallowed the household whole. But after a moment she looked up, and her eyes held a question she didn't want to ask directly. "Are you planning to change anything?" "Not for now," I said. "But the decisions you were making weren't realistic. That had to stop." She sighed, sat down on the edge of the bed, and rested her hands on her knees. "We weren't trying to push you out. We thought you didn't care about these things anymore." It was the closest she had come to an apology in years. "I cared," I said. "I just didn't want to fight." She stayed a while longer, saying nothing. She didn't defend their actions. She didn't justify the car. She simply sat in the weight of what they had done. When she left the room, she closed the door gently. A small gesture, but a meaningful one. A few hours later, my sister approached me in the hallway. No folder, no list, no plans, just her, hands in her pockets, expression somewhere between proud and embarrassed. "I need to say something," she began. I waited. "When you said the house was in your name, I felt blindsided. But I'll admit this, I shouldn't have planned anything without you. That was wrong. It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. I wasn't trying to exclude you," she added. "I just thought you were distant. We all did." "I wasn't distant," I replied. "I was tired." That truth landed between us more heavily than anything else. She nodded slowly, as if finally seeing the strain she had ignored for years. Then she hesitated. "Are you going to change how things work around here?" "Yes," I said. "A few things will change." She didn't argue. For the first time, she accepted the answer without resistance. But the most interesting shift came from my brother. He didn't knock. He didn't approach politely. He found me in the kitchen that evening, arms crossed, jaw tight, not angry, but cornered. "You knew the whole time," he said. "Yes." "And you watched us make plans." "I did." "Why?" "Because I wanted to see how far you'd go." He swallowed, not liking the answer, but understanding it. "I shouldn't have tried to make decisions without you," he said. "But you have to admit, you weren't exactly involved." "I wasn't involved because every time I tried to be, someone told me they had it handled." He looked away, leaned against the counter. "So what now?" he asked. "You stop planning to use the house for loans," I said. "You stop selling things that aren't yours, and we start communicating like adults, not like people fighting over an inheritance." He nodded once, a short, sharp gesture of reluctant agreement. "And the car?" he asked after a moment. "That's done," I replied. "I'm not chasing that." He exhaled, relieved. Not surprised, just relieved. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "If Dad put the house in your name, he must have had a reason." "He did." "What reason?" I considered telling him. Maybe I should have. But he wasn't ready for that truth yet. The reason my father had whispered to me in a hospital room, the promise he had asked me to keep. So I said only, "One day when the time is right, you'll understand." He didn't like the answer, but he didn't press. As he left the kitchen, he stopped at the doorway. "You know," he said. "For years I thought you didn't care about this family." "I cared too much," I replied. "That's how I lost half my life." He didn't argue, just nodded once more and walked away. That night, for the first time in a long time, the house was quiet. Not hostile, not secretive, but reflective. People were thinking, questioning themselves, rethinking assumptions they had treated as facts for decades. They knew the situation had changed. They just didn't know how much. Not yet. When responsibility stops being invisible. The seventh day brought a different kind of tension. Not aggressive, not defensive, but uncertain. The kind of uncertainty that settles into a household when people finally realize they've been relying on something they never understood. For years, I had been the quiet foundation of the family. Not the loud one, not the demanding one, just the one who made things work. Bills paid, repairs handled, paperwork quietly managed. They never questioned it. They never asked how. They never asked why. They only noticed the results, not the effort behind them. But now the results had a face, and that face was mine. When I came down for breakfast, the three of them were already there. No folders, no lists, no plans, just an uncomfortable silence none of them quite knew how to break. My mother finally spoke. "We didn't realize how much you were doing," she said. "We took it for granted." It was one of the rare times she admitted something without searching for excuses behind it. My sister nodded. We were too used to thinking everything would somehow work out. That somehow had been me for more than 2 decades. My brother sat quietly for a moment, then said, "I think we all forgot how things functioned before you stepped in." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he had come to one. I sat with them, not out of forgiveness, but because the conversation was long overdue. I asked, "Do you know how much it costs every year to keep this house running?" 3 blank expressions. "Do you know how much the property taxes are?" I continued. "Or the repairs I've handled, or the insurance?" No one answered. My sister finally admitted, "I never thought about it." That, I said, was the problem. My brother leaned back. "So explain it to us. Not to argue, just to understand." So I did. I talked them through everything they had never seen. The roof repair from 8 years ago. The plumbing issue no one noticed because I fixed it before it became a disaster. The yearly maintenance fees, the insurance adjustments after Dad passed, the property tax increases, the legal responsibilities tied to owning an old house. None of the details were dramatic. They were simply facts. Facts no one had cared to learn until now. When I finished, the room stayed silent for a while. My mother's eyes were tired. My sister's shoulders had dropped. My brother looked down at the table, processing more than he wanted to admit. "So, all these years, you've been handling everything?" my mother asked. "Yes, and we never helped." "You helped," I said, "just not with the responsibilities that actually mattered." It wasn't meant to hurt them. It was simply true. My sister swallowed, her voice low. "If we'd known the house was yours, maybe we would have treated things differently." "It shouldn't have taken a piece of paper for that," I replied. "Respect shouldn't depend on ownership." That line changed something in the room. My brother stood up and walked toward the window. He kept his back to us, as if ashamed to face the reality he'd ignored for years. "So what happens now?" he asked. I considered my words carefully. They were listening, really listening, for the first time. "We're going to create clear boundaries," I said. "Everyone contributes, everyone respects limits, and no one makes decisions behind anyone's back, not anymore." My sister nodded first. "That's fair." My mother agreed quietly. "Yes, it's time." My brother turned around slowly. "And the house?" he asked. "What does this mean for the future?" This time, I didn't avoid the question. "It means I'm not going anywhere," I said, "and neither are you. But the way this family operates is going to change. permanently. My mother exhaled with relief. My sister looked almost grateful. But my brother, he wasn't relieved. He was thoughtful, calculating something in his mind. And I knew that expression well. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't anger. It was realization. Realization that he had misjudged me for years. Realization that the quiet one in the family was not powerless. Realization that the balance of the household had shifted. And this time, it wasn't shifting back. Later that evening, as I walked through the house, I noticed something different. Not the furniture, not the walls, not the familiar creaks in the floor. It was their behavior. For once, they weren't walking around like owners. They moved like people who understood they were guests in someone else's responsibility, and finally respected that responsibility. It didn't mean everything was forgiven. It didn't mean everything was fixed, but it meant something rare had appeared in this house for the first time in years. A beginning. The day they finally asked the right questions. It was the first morning in a long time when the house didn't feel like a battlefield. No raised voices, no slammed doors, no whispers behind walls. Just a quiet, uneasy calm. The kind families experience only after a truth powerful enough to shake. The foundation has been spoken. I woke up earlier than usual, and for once, it wasn't because I expected problems. It was because something had shifted yesterday. Something subtle, but real. For years, they had walked through this house with the confidence of people who believed everything around them simply existed on its own. The electricity, the repairs, the bills, the roof over their heads. But last night, when the truth settled in, that confidence dissolved. When I entered the kitchen, they were already there, not waiting for me, but aware of me. There's a difference. My sister was leaning over a notebook. My mother was holding her glasses in her hand. My brother was restless, tapping the table lightly with the side of his thumb. I poured myself coffee and sat down. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, my sister cleared her throat. "We want to understand everything," she said quietly. "Not just bits of it, all of it. Not defensive, not proud, not patronizing, just honest." I looked at her, measuring the seriousness behind her words. She didn't look away. "Good," I said. "Where do you want to start?" My brother opened a folder, a thin one, but it was something. "How does property tax actually work?" he asked. I blinked. They had lived in this house for years and never asked a single practical question about it. Not once. The closest they ever came to curiosity was when something broke and they asked, "When will it be fixed?" Never how, never why. So I explained, not in complex terms, not in a condescending way, just clearly. How old houses carry heavier maintenance, how insurance doesn't cover everything, how the region evaluates property, how seasonal damage adds up, how legal documents work, how banks behave when ownership is unclear. They listened in full silence. My mother even took notes, something I had never seen her do outside of medical appointments or grocery lists. At one point, she stopped and asked, "How did you learn all this?" I smiled faintly. "Because I had to." That answer made her look down for a moment. My sister pressed on. "So every time there was a problem, you handled it alone?" "Yes, and we never noticed." "You noticed," I corrected. "You just didn't connect the dots." A long breath escaped her lips, the sound of someone processing guilt they didn't want to admit to. My brother leaned forward in his chair. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" There was no accusation in his voice, only confusion. "I did," I replied. "Many times. You just didn't take it seriously." He had no rebuttal for that. None of them did. Silence returned, but it wasn't the cold kind. It wasn't the silence of anger or distance. This was the silence of learning. The silence people fall into when they finally understand the weight someone has been carrying. After a while, my mother asked a question she'd avoided for years. "Did you ever resent us?" I took time before answering. not to spare her feelings, but to give myself a moment to be honest. "Yes," I said simply. She closed her eyes briefly. She didn't cry, but she absorbed it like a deep bruise. "But," I added, "resentment doesn't erase love. It just means some things need to change." That brought a different kind of silence, one mixed with relief and shame. When the conversation shifted again, my sister said something unexpected. "You always made everything look easy. Maybe that's why we didn't ask." I shook my head. "Nothing was easy. You just never saw the hard parts." The atmosphere softened, not with sentimentality, but with understanding. Sometimes that's worth more. My brother glanced toward the living room. "We've been talking," he said, "and we all think the same thing." I raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" He looked serious, not defensive, not nervous, just genuine. "It's time we take responsibility for the house, too. Even if you own it, we live here. We should contribute like adults, not children." For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't felt in this home. Respect. Not forced, not guilt-induced, not dramatic, just simple, mature respect. "And," my sister added, "from now on, no decisions without you. That includes money, repairs, everything." "And no secrets," my mother finished softly. "No more assuming, no more guessing, no more leaving everything on your shoulders." Her voice shook, but her resolve didn't. I leaned back, taking in their words. They weren't perfect. They had hurt me. They had acted selfishly more times than I could count. But today, for the first time, they were speaking like people who understood the value of what they nearly lost. Finally, I nodded. "All right," I said. "If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. Not for a week, not until guilt fades, permanently." All three agreed without hesitation. It didn't erase the past, it didn't fix everything instantly, but it created something the house had never seen before. A shared commitment, a real one. And as strange as it sounds, that morning, sitting at the same table where so many arguments had simmered, I suddenly realized something. This was the first chapter where the story shifted from damage to rebuilding. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, rebuilding. A different thing entirely, when the balance finally shifted. The 9th chapter of this story didn't begin with drama. No shouting, no accusations, no emotional explosions. It began with work, real, practical, everyday responsibility. Something my family had avoided for most of their lives, and for the first time, I wasn't the only one doing it. That morning, I stepped outside to check the condition of the gutters. It had rained heavily the night before, and old houses like ours have a habit of showing their age when the weather turns unpredictable. Usually, I would handle everything alone, but that day, I wasn't alone. My brother followed me out with a ladder, quiet but determined. "I'll hold it," he said almost casually. I looked at him, slightly surprised. He wasn't making a grand gesture. He wasn't asking for praise. He was simply there, present, participating. A simple thing, but in our family, simple things used to be impossible. As I climbed the ladder, he steadied it with both hands. I could hear him breathing, a little tense, afraid I'd fall, a concern he hadn't shown in years. He finally asked, "Is it always this bad after rain?" "Yes," I replied. "You just never noticed." He let out a quiet hum, absorbing the truth without arguing. When I climbed down, he didn't walk away. He stood there and asked the question no one in the family had ever asked before. "What else needs to be done?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I dreamed of this kind of responsibility from them, but dreaming about change is different from seeing it in front of you. I listed a few tasks, small things, nothing overwhelming. He nodded and started on them without hesitation. Inside the house, my sister was wiping down cabinets, sorting old receipts, trying to make sense of the years of chaos they had let accumulate. She wasn't perfect at it. She stopped often, confused, overwhelmed, but she was trying. And my mother was in the living room, carefully organizing documents with her reading glasses on, muttering under her breath every time she realized she'd ignored something for too long. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the only adult in the house. It felt unfamiliar, strange, almost uncomfortable, like watching someone else wear clothes that had always belonged to you. But it also felt right. Later that afternoon, when the work slowed down, my mother called me into the kitchen. She wasn't crying. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't angry. She was thoughtful. "I've been thinking," she said, hands resting on the table. "When your father was alive, he handled everything. After he passed, you stepped in. And somehow, we forgot that responsibility wasn't automatic." She paused. "We forgot it belonged to the people living under the roof, not just the one paying for it." Her honesty felt heavier than any argument we'd had. "I didn't raise you to be their servant," she continued, "but that's what you became." I let her words hang in the air. She wasn't wrong. She looked down. "I'm sorry." Not dramatic, not guilt-driven, just sincere. I sat across from her. "It wasn't your fault alone," I said. "Everyone played a part." She nodded slowly. "Still, I should have seen it." We talked for a while, openly, for the first time in years, not as parent and child, but as adults acknowledging a shared history of mistakes. Later that evening, my sister joined us. She was holding an envelope, the same envelope she had once ignored, assuming it wasn't important because it wasn't her responsibility. "I sorted the mail," she said, a little proud of herself, "properly this time." She handed me the envelope. When I opened it, I found a letter addressed to me from months ago, one they had misplaced carelessly. She swallowed. "I'm sorry for that, really." I nodded. "It's all right. Let's just make sure it doesn't happen again." My brother entered the room last. He wiped dust off his hands, looked around the house, and said, "It's a lot, isn't it? Keeping everything running." "Yes," I replied. "It always was." He nodded deeply. "Then from now on, we do it together." That sentence didn't magically heal years of imbalance. It didn't erase the resentment, but it did mark a turning point, a shift in the weight distribution that had long crushed me alone. After dinner, I stepped outside for fresh air. The sun was setting, painting the street with soft gold light. The house behind me, the house I had protected for years, finally felt different. Not because its structure had changed, but because the people inside had, even if only a little. And small changes, when combined, can reshape entire lives. As I stood there, listening to the quiet evening, I realized something important. Strength doesn't always come from being the one who carries everything. Sometimes strength comes from letting others finally feel the weight. When the house started speaking the truth. The 10th chapter began with a strange feeling, not dread, not exhaustion, not anger, but clarity. For the first time in years, the house felt like it was breathing differently, lighter, cleaner, more honest, as if the walls, after holding so many secrets, finally exhaled. I woke up to the sound of quiet footsteps instead of chaos. My sister moving through the hallway, picking up things she used to ignore. My brother taking bags of trash outside, the same trash he once pretended not to see. My mother in the kitchen, running her fingers across the counter with the expression of someone rediscovering a space she had occupied for decades but never fully respected. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't a miracle. It was simply effort. And effort was something this household had lacked for too long. When I walked downstairs, they all looked at me, not for approval, but acknowledgement, and that alone was new. My brother nodded toward the front entrance. "The lock is loose," he said. "I'm going to fix it today." I raised an eyebrow. "You know how?" "Not really," he admitted without embarrassment, "but I'll figure it out." He said it with a tone I hadn't heard from him since we were kids, a tone that meant he wasn't going to hand the problem to me like a bag of groceries. He was going to learn, fail, try again, and deal with the consequences. That alone felt like a small revolution. My sister approached next. "I'm reorganizing the storage room," she said. "There's a lot of old stuff we don't need." I nodded. "Just don't throw anything important." She smiled faintly. "I'll check with you first. I've learned my lesson." That sentence, "I'll check with you first," was something I never thought I'd hear from her. My mother didn't say anything at first. She simply gestured for me to sit at the table. When I did, she placed a small box in front of me, one I hadn't seen in years. "What's this?" I asked. She sat down across from me. "Your father's things," she said softly. "I kept them. I thought I would know when the right time came to open it again." I hesitated, not because I was afraid, but because I wasn't expecting her to bring him into this moment. She continued, "I never told you this, but after he passed, I felt lost, and your responsibility made it easy for me to hide from my own responsibilities." She looked older saying that, not weaker, older in the way truth ages a person. "I'm sorry I leaned on you so much," she whispered. "You were too young." I opened the box. The first thing I saw was his old watch, scratched on the edges but still ticking. The second was a folded piece of paper, my father's handwriting. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't long, just a list. His handwriting listing monthly expenses for the house with notes beside each one. Reminders for himself, reminders for my mother, calculations for the next year, things to monitor, things to fix. It was the last list he ever made. My mother's eyes softened. He used to say, "Responsibility is what makes a home stay standing." I nodded. He was right. And then she added, almost painfully, "You became him too soon." That sentence struck deep, not in a dramatic way, but in a way that made me understand something I had always known subconsciously. I hadn't just taken over responsibility. I had filled a role they weren't ready to face. After a moment of silence, my brother came in holding a screwdriver. "Oh," he said, seeing the box. "Bad time?" "No," I replied. "It's fine." He stood there awkwardly for a moment, then sat down beside me. "What's that?" he asked quietly. "Dad's list," I said. He leaned over, studying the handwriting. "I don't think I've ever seen this." "I know," I said. Because he hadn't been paying attention back then. None of them had. He exhaled slowly. "Well, maybe we should make a new list. Together." My sister walked in next, wiping dust off her hands, and saw the box. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Dad's things," my mother said softly. My sister stood still, silent, respectful. Then, for the first time in years, she asked, "Can we go through it together?" Just like that, all four of us sat around the table, not arguing, not blaming, not pretending, just being a family, not a perfect one, not a healed one, but a present one. We went through the box piece by piece, old photos, a couple of receipts, a key we couldn't identify, a notebook with unfinished thoughts. Every item had its own weight, its own story. By the time we finished, the afternoon light had shifted into soft evening gold. My mother wiped her eyes and said, "We've avoided the truth for years, but running from responsibility didn't protect us. It only weakened us." She looked at me directly. "You carried what we were afraid to face, and then, without any hesitation, we won't let you carry it alone anymore." Not a promise, a commitment. When the box was closed, my brother placed his hand on top of it. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll start with the roof. I'll help you check everything." My sister nodded. "I'll organize the bills." My mother added, "I'll handle the calls." For once, they weren't giving me tasks. They were taking them. And as I stood up and looked around, I realized something important. The house wasn't just a building I owned. It was proof of every burden, every sacrifice, every moment I survived when no one was watching. But now, Finally. The house wasn't speaking just through me. They were finally listening. They were finally learning. And for the first time in decades, this old house, with its creaking floors, stubborn doors, and fading paint, felt like a shared responsibility again, a shared story. The first real test. The 11th chapter was the moment the story stopped being symbolic and became real. It was the moment when all the promises, all the apologies, all the commitments were put to the test, not with words, but with action. Up until then, everything they said sounded sincere. They were trying, learning, doing small things around the house. But small things are easy. Big things reveal the truth, and the house didn't take long to test them. That week, a storm hit. One of those heavy, unpredictable storms that make old houses groan under the weight of wind and rain, the kind of storm that never knocks politely. It barges in. Late at night, I heard the first sign, a slow, rhythmic drip. Drip, drip, coming from the attic. I froze. Not because I was scared of water, but because I knew exactly what that sound meant. The roof was leaking again, and leaks don't wait until morning. They worsen by the second. I walked upstairs with a flashlight, prepared to handle it alone, as I had done dozens of times before. But when I opened my door, something unexpected happened. My brother was already in the hallway, half-dressed, hair messy, holding a bucket. "You heard it too?" he asked. It was the first time he had ever reacted before me. We went upstairs together. My sister joined us seconds later, arms crossed over her chest, shivering slightly from the cold draft. "What's happening?" she whispered. "The roof," I said. "It's leaking." Without hesitation, she said, "Tell me what to bring." She didn't run away. She didn't say, "You handle it." She didn't pretend not to understand. She stood there waiting for instructions, as a responsible adult would. My mother came last, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "I'll get towels," she said, already turning back down the stairs. No panic, no blame, no excuses, just cooperation. We reached the attic. The leak wasn't catastrophic yet, but it was steady, enough to cause damage if ignored. Normally, this entire moment would have played out differently. I would have climbed the ladder alone. They would have stayed downstairs, hoping it wasn't too serious. And by morning, I'd be the only one soaked and exhausted. But not this time. My brother held the ladder without being asked. My sister spread towels under the weak point in the ceiling. My mother positioned buckets to catch the water. I climbed up with the flashlight and inspected the source. A loose shingle, wind damage. Nothing surprising. Just another reminder that old houses need constant vigilance. "It's manageable," I said. "We just need to patch it temporarily until morning." My sister looked at the roof anxiously. "Is it dangerous?" "Only if neglected." The word neglected echoed in the room. Everyone fell silent for a moment. Guilt, recognition, understanding, all mixing together. My brother finally broke the silence. "We're not neglecting it," he said firmly. "Not anymore." And he meant it. We worked for nearly an hour. None of us complained. None of us argued. They didn't disappear halfway through the job. They stayed. Through the noise. Through the cold. Through the stress. For once, it wasn't me versus the storm. It was all of us. When the temporary patch was secure and the dripping slowed, we all stood there, breathing hard. My sister wiped her forehead. "I didn't know it was this much work," she admitted. "It always was," I said gently. She nodded. "But I didn't know because I never bothered to see it." My brother looked around the attic. The old beams, the worn insulation, the marks of past repairs I had done alone. "You've been saving this house your entire life," he said quietly. "And we didn't even thank you." I shrugged. "I didn't do it for thanks." "That's the problem," he replied. "You shouldn't have had to do it alone." That sentence carried more weight than the storm outside. When we finally came downstairs, exhausted and damp, my mother made tea. Not the rushed kind she made when hiding stress, the careful kind, the way she used to make it when my father was alive. As she placed the cups in front of us, she said, "This house survived because of you, but from now on, it will survive because of us." She touched my hand lightly, a gesture she rarely used. "I'm proud of you," she whispered, "not for fixing the roof, not for handling the crisis, but for everything." My sister sipped her tea and leaned back. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think responsibility was just for the person who cared the most. I didn't understand that responsibility is what creates people who care." I nodded slowly. My brother added, half smiling, "Well, now we care too." The storm outside continued. Rain hammered against the windows. Wind roared like it wanted to tear something apart. But inside the house, something had finally been repaired. Not the roof, but the balance. And in that warmth, in that quiet shared fatigue, I realized something I hadn't let myself believe. They were changing. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. Not because they feared losing the house, but because they finally understood they had almost lost me. The conversation that changed everything. The 12th chapter did not begin with a storm or an argument. It began with something far more difficult for my family than any crisis. An honest conversation. Not the kind that ends quickly. Not the kind where everyone talks but no one listens. Not the kind that circles around the truth without touching it. A real one. The morning after the storm, the house smelled faintly of wet wood and fresh tea. Everyone was tired, but it was the kind of tired that comes from doing something meaningful. My brother was the first to speak. "We need a meeting," he said, not joking, not sarcastic, serious. We all sat down in the living room, the same room where years of assumptions had been born, the same room where silence had replaced responsibility, the same room that had seen more resentment than understanding. But today it felt different. Not because the furniture had changed, not because the walls looked new, but because the people sitting inside the room were not the same people who once ignored everything around them. My brother cleared his throat. "I'll start," he said, "and you can say whatever you need afterward." He looked straight at me. "I was lazy," he said. "I depended on you. Not because you offered, but because I expected it. And I didn't care how heavy it was for you. I just didn't want to deal with anything." Hearing him admit that without disguises, without ego, it felt like a wall collapsing. My sister nodded slowly. "I think I was worse," she said. "I complained about things I never helped fix. I acted like the house existed for my comfort. I didn't even think about how much work goes into keeping it running." She swallowed. "And I judged you sometimes. I thought you were too controlling or too serious, when in reality, you were the only one acting like an adult." She shook her head at herself. "I was blind, and I'm embarrassed." That word, embarrassed, carried a lot of weight coming from her. Then my mother spoke last with a calm, steady voice. "When your father passed," she began, "I fell apart in ways I didn't show. I let you take responsibility because it was easy, and because it relieved me of facing my own fears." She clasped her hands tightly. "I should have stepped up. I should have taught your brother and sister responsibility. I should have taught them to protect this home the way your father did." A long pause. "And instead, I let you do everything." I looked at her for a moment, realizing that this was the first time she had ever admitted her part without excuses or softening the truth. She added more softly, "You were the child. I was the parent. And somewhere along the way, the roles switched. That wasn't fair to you." The room felt heavier with her words. Not painful, but honest. I took a slow breath. "Thank you," I said, "for saying that." But then I added something they all needed to hear. "However, this isn't about the past anymore. We can't rewrite it. We can only decide what the future looks like." My brother leaned forward. "That's why I called this meeting," he said. "We want rules, real ones, clear ones." I blinked. "Rules?" "Yes," he continued. "House rules, responsibilities, contributions, boundaries, everything. No more confusion, no more assumptions." My sister nodded. "We want to know exactly what we should do, no more leaving things to luck." My mother added quietly, "And no more avoiding our duties." I couldn't help but smile internally, not outwardly, because I didn't want to turn the moment sentimental. But this was exactly what I had waited for. Not perfection, not apologies, accountability. "All right," I said. "Let's talk." My brother opened a notebook. My sister held a pen. My mother adjusted her glasses. It felt like a board meeting, but of a family that finally understood they were shareholders in the same home. I listed everything as clearly as possible. Monthly expenses, maintenance responsibilities, what needed immediate repair, what could wait, who would handle phone calls, who would track paperwork, who would clean which areas, who would save for emergencies, how decisions would be made, how communication should work. Surprisingly, no one argued. No one pushed tasks away. No one tried to negotiate for the easy ones. They assigned themselves roles that made sense, and they volunteered for more than I expected. My brother took repairs and outdoor maintenance. My sister took household organization and budgeting. My mother took documentation, calls, and coordination. I took oversight, not domination, not control, oversight. For once, I wasn't carrying the house. I was guiding it. After we finished the list, my sister let out a long breath. "This feels real," she said. "It is real," I replied. My brother pushed the notebook toward me. "Sign it," he said, "so we all commit." I raised an eyebrow. "That's dramatic." "Maybe," he said, "but we need dramatic. We were useless for decades." I signed. They signed. For the first time in our lives, we created a structure, something families rarely do, but should. Then my mother asked something simple, but meaningful. "Is there anything else we should change?" I looked around the room, at the walls, the furniture, the faded paint, the tiny signs of neglect that had accumulated over the years. "Yes," I said finally. "This room." My sister tilted her head. "What about it?" "It needs to be rearranged," I said. "New energy, new perspective. If we're rebuilding the family, we should rebuild the space too." My brother grinned slightly. "You mean like renovating?" "Not full renovation," I said. "Just enough to mark a new start." My mother smiled softly. "I like that idea." They all got up, instantly, as if they had been waiting for a physical way to show their commitment. We moved furniture. We cleaned corners that hadn't been touched in years. We sorted through old magazines and forgotten objects. We made space, literally and emotionally. By the time the room was finished, evening light poured through the windows, hitting the walls in a way I'd never seen before. My sister looked around and whispered, "It feels like a different house." My brother added, "No, it feels like ours for the first time." And he was right, not because they lived here, but because they were finally invested in it. As we stood there, breathing in the scent of dust and new beginnings, I realized the house wasn't testing them anymore. They were proving themselves. When the past finally spoke up. Chapter 13 didn't begin with work, responsibility, or conflict. It began with memory, the kind that arrives quietly, without warning, and refuses to leave until it's acknowledged. That morning, the house was unusually calm. The air felt lighter after the changes we made the day before. Furniture moved, corners cleaned, dust gone, energy renewed. But as often happens when a space becomes clean, emotions begin to surface. Because clutter doesn't only exist in rooms, it exists in people. And now that the physical clutter was disappearing, the emotional one began rising. I walked into the newly arranged living room, expecting silence. Instead, I found my mother staring at an old photo album she had pulled from one of the shelves we had cleaned. She didn't look sad. She looked reflective. "Sit," she said gently when she noticed me. I sat beside her, unsure what was coming. She opened the album to a page I hadn't seen in decades. There was my father, standing in front of this same house, younger, confident, proud. Beside him, my mother, smiling in a way I almost didn't recognize. And below them, small versions of us, carefree, unaware of anything except the moment. My mother traced her finger over my father's image. "You look like him now," she said quietly. "Not in your face, but in your presence." I didn't respond at first. Compliments from her were rare, especially ones rooted in emotion. Then she turned the page. Photos of birthdays, gatherings, holidays, moments filled with noise, laughter, warmth, things the house hadn't seen in years. "You know," she said, "this house was your father's pride. He worked so hard to keep it standing. Every leak, every broken pipe, every storm, he faced them with the same stubborn determination you have." I smirked faintly. "I guess I inherited that part." "You inherited more than that," she corrected. "You inherited his sense of responsibility, his discipline, his loyalty to family, even when they didn't deserve it." Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but from honesty. Then she said something I never expected. "And I think that's why we lost ourselves after he died, because we didn't know how to live without someone carrying the weight for us." The room fell silent. I didn't rush to fill it. Some silences are necessary. Some silences heal. A few minutes later, my brother walked in, stopping when he saw the album. "What's going on?" he asked. My mother handed him the book. "We're remembering," she said. He sat down slowly, flipping through the pages. He stopped at a picture of Dad fixing the fence while we played nearby. "I never realized how much he did," my brother murmured. "I thought things just happened." My sister entered next, drawn by the quiet intensity of the room. She sat beside us without saying a word, watching the photos carefully. Then she whispered, "Maybe we grew up expecting men to fix everything. First Dad, then you." She looked straight at me. That was wrong. No excuses, no explanations, just pure acknowledgement. I nodded. "We don't need to blame the past," I said. "We just need to understand it." My mother closed the album softly. "There's something else I want to show you," she said. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, one that had yellowed with age, my father's handwriting. My breath caught for a moment. "It's his last letter," she said. "The one he wrote before he went into the hospital. I never showed it to you because I didn't know how." She handed it to me. My siblings leaned closer. I opened it carefully. The letter was short, but every line felt like a weight, lifting and falling at the same time. "If anything happens to me, take care of the house. It's not just walls and a roof. It's where we learned, fought, grew, and stayed together. Protect it and protect each other." My sister covered her mouth. My brother bowed his head. My mother wiped tears quietly. And then we reached the last part. "And if responsibility falls on one of you, help them. Do not leave them alone." Silence. Deep, heavy, truth-filled silence. A silence that said, "We failed him. We failed you. But we are changing now." My mother whispered, "I kept this letter all these years. But I did the opposite of what he asked." I placed my hand gently on hers. "We can't change what we didn't know," I said softly, "but we can change everything from this moment forward." My brother lifted his head. "He trusted us," he said, "even when we weren't worthy." My sister added, "Now we have to earn that trust." And for the first time in years, the house didn't just feel like a place where things happened, it felt like a place where things healed. We closed the album and sat together in quiet unity. Not forced, not strained, not tense. Just together. A family starting again, a house remembering what it once stood for, and me, finally realizing that responsibility didn't make me a victim. It made me the person my father hoped one of us would become. The house that finally breathed. The next morning didn't feel like any other morning in that house. It felt lighter, as if the walls themselves were finally exhaling after years of holding in too much. No arguing, no tension, no silent, invisible pressure weighing down on everyone, just calm. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel tired. I walked into the kitchen expecting the usual mess, dishes, someone's unfinished something. But instead, the table was clean, the counters were wiped, the floor was swept. My sister was standing by the sink, actually washing dishes without being asked. She glanced at me, embarrassed but sincere. "Good morning," she said quietly. A normal greeting. But coming from her, it felt like a step toward a completely new version of us. My brother soon joined, carrying a trash bag from his room. "I'm going to the dumpster," he said. "There's no point keeping all this garbage." He wasn't exaggerating. That bag looked like it contained half the unnecessary things he had hoarded for years. And then, unexpectedly, my mother entered with a small box filled with old paperwork. "I'm sorting through everything today," she announced. "No more holding on to things that keep us stuck." Her tone wasn't weak. It wasn't stressed. It was firm in a way I hadn't heard from her in years. For a moment, I simply stood there, taking it all in. These changes weren't huge on the surface. Dishes, trash, organization. But emotionally, they were massive. Because these weren't chores. They were decisions, intentions, actions we had all avoided for far too long. And they were doing it without me telling them to. That was new. My sister broke the quiet first. "You know," she said, wiping her hands on a towel, "I kept waiting for someone else to fix things for us. I didn't even realize how much I relied on you to do everything." She paused, lowering her eyes. "That wasn't fair." My brother nodded, almost reluctantly. "I think I treated you like a backup parent," he admitted. "And I acted annoyed when you reminded me of responsibility. But I wasn't angry at you. I was angry at myself." He took a deep breath. "No more of that." My mother set the box on the table. "I let this house fall into chaos because I felt alone," she said. "But I forgot that you were all still here. I just didn't want to accept that I couldn't manage everything on my own." Her voice trembled for a second, but she didn't let it break. "From now on, we share the load." That sentence carried more weight than anything else she'd said in months. I grabbed a chair and sat down. "Okay," I said, "then we start today." My sister smiled slightly. "Today is good." We began dividing tasks, voluntarily, not with tension or guilt. My sister took responsibility for the kitchen and her own room. My brother took the trash, storage areas, and outside cleaning. My mother claimed the paperwork, bills, and the long-ignored stack of documents that had haunted her. And I, for the first time, didn't feel like the only adult in the house. As we worked, something shocking happened. We laughed. Not loud, forced laughter, natural, comfortable, unexpected. At one point, my brother found an old shirt he used to wear in his early teens. "Bro, why did you let me walk around like this?" he joked. My sister burst out laughing. "You looked like a rejected cartoon character." Even my mother cracked a smile. It had been so long since I heard that sound from her that for a moment, I simply watched her, just to make sure it was real. And it was. Everything happening felt real. By noon, the house already looked different. Not perfect, not finished, but alive. My sister started cooking. Properly cooking for all of us, not just for herself. My brother cleaned the hallway closets. My mother was sorting documents she had avoided for nearly a decade. The more they worked, the more I felt something shift inside me, too. I didn't have to carry everything anymore, not because the weight disappeared, but because they finally picked it up with me. Later in the afternoon, when we all took a break, my mother sat down beside me on the couch. "You know," she said softly, "yesterday when you read that letter, I understood something." I turned to her. "What?" She touched her chest gently. "Your father didn't ask one of you to become strong for the rest. He asked all of you to take care of each other. I forgot that, and you've been alone for too long because of my mistake." I shook my head. It wasn't a mistake. It was survival. She gave a faint smile. "But we're not surviving anymore," she said. "Now we're living." And she was right. The house felt like it was waking up. We were too. By evening, the sun slipping through the clean windows cast warm, golden light across the room, something I hadn't noticed in years. It looked like hope, real hope, not imagined, not forced, not dreamed, earned. And as we all sat together at the table, eating the first proper family meal we'd had in what felt like forever, I realized something. This house, once a place of tension and exhaustion, was beginning to feel like home again, not because the rooms changed, but because we did. The letter I had feared to open. The next morning I woke earlier than usual, not because of noise, not because of stress, just naturally. For years I had forced myself out of bed to keep the house functioning. Now, for the first time, I woke with a sense of clarity instead of obligation. The house was quiet, but not the heavy, suffocating sort of quiet I had grown used to. This was a peaceful kind, the kind that comes after honesty and effort, not avoidance. I went to the kitchen to make coffee, but stopped when I saw something on the table. A small sealed envelope. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting. Not new, of course. Old. Old enough that the ink had faded slightly and the paper had softened at the edges. My mother must have found it yesterday while sorting documents. For a moment, I just stared at it. I had known this letter existed. My father mentioned it once, years ago, saying he wrote something for the future. But life got busy. Then he got sick. Then everything fell apart. And after he passed, the house became a battlefield of emotions, responsibilities, and unspoken grief. The letter simply disappeared into the chaos. Until today. I sat down slowly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. I held the envelope in both hands. It felt lighter than I expected for something carrying so much weight. I slid a finger under the flap and opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. His handwriting, slightly rushed but unmistakable, covered most of the page. I took a breath, and I began to read. "My child, if you're reading this, it means life has moved forward in ways I can't control anymore." I felt a sting in my chest, but I forced myself to continue. "I know how this house can pull people apart. Not because it is cursed, but because people have a way of making their own prisons." I closed my eyes for a moment. He knew. He had always known. "You are strong. Stronger than you realize. But promise me something. Don't let your strength turn into silent suffering." The words hit harder than I expected. I had spent years doing exactly that. You will want peace for everyone. But not everyone will know how to give it back to you. Guide them, don't carry them. Teach them, don't replace them. I paused again. He wasn't telling me to sacrifice myself. He was telling me to stop doing it. And remember this. Love isn't proven by what you give up. Love is proven by who grows with you. That line, it felt like he had written it yesterday. I continued reading. "I left the house in your name for a simple reason. You were the one who understood responsibility without being asked. But I did not leave it to burden you. I left it so you would never be afraid of losing your place in this world." My throat tightened. All those years, all the arguments, all the misunderstandings, they came from a secret I didn't ask for but had inherited anyway. If the others forget this house must be shared, remind them gently. If they refuse to remember, remind them firmly. I exhaled slowly. He wasn't telling me to dominate the house. He was telling me to lead, a kind of leadership I had avoided for too long. The final paragraph was short. One day, they will understand your silence, but I hope before that day comes, you learn to speak, not with anger, but with truth. At the bottom was a date, almost 11 years old. I folded the letter carefully, as if it were something fragile. My hands were trembling, not from sadness, but from recognition. He had seen the future better than any of us. I placed the letter back into the envelope and set it on the table. As I did, I heard soft footsteps behind me. My mother. She hesitated by the doorway. "You read it?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "Yes." Her eyes softened, and for a moment she looked younger, not physically, but emotionally, as if a weight she had carried for years lifted the moment she knew the letter had reached me. "I hid it after he passed," she admitted, "not because I wanted to keep it from you, but because I couldn't face anything he left behind. It hurt too much." I didn't blame her. Grief affects people differently. "It's okay," I said. "I think I was only ready for it now." She walked closer, pulling out a chair and sitting across from me. "What did he say?" she asked. I considered summarizing it, softening it, making it easier, but something told me not to. So I told her the truth, the real truth. "He said we all made our own prisons," I said quietly, "and he didn't want me living in mine." She looked down, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "He knew you were the one holding everything together," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "He knew I was the one who tried to hold everything together. There's a difference." She looked up, meeting my eyes. "What difference?" "He didn't expect me to save everyone," I said. "He expected everyone to grow." A long silence settled between us, not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, my mother reached across the table and touched my hand. "We're ready to grow now," she said. "All of us." And for the first time, I believed her, not because of her words, but because of her face, the quiet determination in it, the sincerity, the humility. I looked at the envelope again and whispered a silent thought to my father. "They're changing. And I am too." Then I stood up, folded the envelope once more, and placed it gently in the drawer where important things finally belonged, not hidden, not forgotten, just acknowledged. The decision that would change everything. The house was quiet in the late afternoon, but not in the tense, heavy way it used to be. This quiet felt thoughtful, like everyone was processing their own part of the change we had stepped into. I sat by the window with a notebook, something I hadn't touched in years, not for writing stories, not for journaling, just planning, something my life had rarely allowed before. The envelope with my father's letter was neatly placed inside the drawer beside me. Knowing it was there, not lost, not hidden, gave me a strange sense of stability. As I wrote small notes and ideas, my brother walked into the room. He didn't knock, but this time he didn't barge in either. He paused at the doorway, waiting for me to acknowledge him. That alone was progress. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." He stepped in, hands in his pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't nervous exactly, just trying to be careful with his words. "I've been thinking," he said, "about everything. The house, the mess we made, how you've been doing more than all of us combined." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't want you to feel like we're leeching off you." I raised an eyebrow. "Is that how you think I see it?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. And honestly, I wouldn't blame you." I set my notebook down. "Sit," I said. He did. For a moment, we just sat there, the soft ticking of a clock echoing from the hallway. "I don't see you as a leech," I said finally, "but I did feel alone. A lot." He swallowed hard. "You know what the worst part is?" he asked. "I didn't even realize it. I thought you were just stronger than us, like you didn't need help." "That's exactly why I needed help," I said quietly. He nodded, understanding more in silence than in words. Then he took a deep breath. "So I want to contribute," he said, properly, not some symbolic gesture. "I want to pay my share of the bills. I want to help with repairs. Whatever the house needs, I'm in." I didn't hide my surprise. "You're serious?" I asked. As serious as I've ever been in my life. There was no doubt in his voice, no expectation of applause, just sincerity. "Okay," I said, "then we figure this out together." His shoulders loosened, a silent sign of relief. We talked numbers, responsibilities, expectations, not with arguments or emotional manipulation, just reasoning, maturity, respect. It was the first real adult conversation we'd had since we were teenagers. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door again. "You know," he said, "Dad was right about you." I frowned slightly. "Right about what?" "You act like you don't want to lead, but the truth is, you're the only one who knows how." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He walked out quietly, leaving me alone with thoughts that felt heavier than before, but in a good, necessary way. A few minutes later, my sister knocked. An actual knock. She peeked in. "Do you have a moment?" I almost smiled. "Yes, come in." She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap. "I heard you and him talking," she said, "but I wasn't listening. I just noticed how calm everything sounded." I nodded. She took a breath. "I want to contribute too, not just by cleaning or helping around the house. I want a job, a proper job." I blinked. This was completely unexpected. "You're ready?" I asked. She nodded firmly. "I've been hiding behind excuses for too long. I didn't work because I kept telling myself I wasn't good enough. But that was just fear. And fear isn't a valid reason to avoid life." I couldn't help but feel proud. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but I'm willing to try anything. I just don't want my life to pass while I sit still." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't shy away from it. "I want to earn my own place," she continued, "my own confidence, my own money. Not because you pushed me, but because I finally want it for myself." For years, she had seemed lost in her own bubble of hesitation. Seeing her speak like this felt like watching a flower bloom in slow motion after a long, cold winter. "I'll help you," I said softly. "No," she replied. "Let me try first. If I fail, you can help me. But I want the first step to be mine alone." There it was. Growth. Real growth. I nodded. "Okay," I said. "I respect that." She smiled, small but genuine, then stood. Before walking away, she added quietly, "I'm sorry for every year I made you feel like you had to take care of me. I didn't see it then. I see it now." When she left, the room felt strangely full of new possibilities, full of change, full of the emotional maturity I had waited for so long without knowing it. Finally, my mother came in. She didn't knock, but she did something better. She hesitated at the doorway, giving me a choice. "Can I sit?" she asked. "Of course." She sat slowly, as if deciding how much truth she was ready to share. "I sorted through the last of the documents," she said, "and I found something else." She handed me a folder, thin, old, the edges curling. Inside were two things: the original property deed, a letter I had never seen before. This letter wasn't from my father. It was from the notary who had finalized the inheritance. I opened it, scanning quickly. My father hadn't just left the house to me. He had included a clause, a specific instruction. I read it twice to be sure, then a third time. My mother watched my expression change. "You see it?" she asked. "Yes," I said quietly. The clause stated, "The house is to remain in my child's name alone, but it must be treated as a shared home only as long as they choose to allow it." Meaning, I had complete authority, total control. the legal power to make every decision, not to dominate anyone, but to protect myself if things ever became harmful. My mother reached out and touched my hand. "He trusted you the most," she said softly, "not because he wanted you to carry us, but because he knew you wouldn't use this power selfishly." I held the document tighter. This wasn't just a paper. This was a choice, a decision I would eventually have to make. Not today, not immediately, but soon. Because now that everyone was changing, moving, growing, I had to decide the future of this house and my own future in it. Not out of obligation, not out of fear, but out of clarity. The house was no longer a prison, but it wasn't exactly my final destination either. I closed the folder, and in that moment I understood something. To protect the house, I had to start thinking about what came after it. When the teacher becomes the student. The next morning began differently, not because anything dramatic happened, but because I finally felt like I wasn't the only one awake in my own life. My mother was already in the living room, sorting through a pile of documents with a kind of focus I hadn't seen in her since before my father got sick. My brother was outside, repairing the loose fence plank he'd ignored for 3 years. My sister was sitting at the table with her laptop open, scrolling through job listings, taking notes with genuine intent. For years, I had been the one moving while everyone else paused. Now, for the first time, they were moving too, without me pushing them. It felt strange. Good, but strange. I poured myself some tea and sat outside on the steps, letting the morning air clear my thoughts. I had been so used to making every decision alone that now, with everyone actually participating, I wasn't entirely sure what my role was supposed to be. A leader, a guide, a family member, a tired adult who finally had room to breathe. Maybe a bit of all of them. As I took a sip of tea, the front door opened behind me. My sister stepped out, closing the door gently as if not to disturb the quiet. "Can I sit?" she asked. "Yeah." She sat beside me, hugging her knees, the morning sun brushing through her hair. "I applied for 4 jobs," she said, almost shyly. "That's great." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "I didn't realize how much courage it takes just to send a document to someone," she admitted. "I kept thinking about being rejected." "That fear never disappears," I said honestly. "We just learn to move through it." She glanced at me. "You make it look easy." "It's not." "I know," she said softly. For a while, we just sat there watching the neighborhood slowly wake up. The distant sound of a car, the bark of a dog, the creak of someone's gate. Then she rested her chin on her knees. "I want to ask you something," she said, "but promise you won't get upset." I turned to her, curious. "I'll try." She hesitated, then let it out. "How did you become you?" "Me?" "You know," she said, waving her hand vaguely in the air. "Strong, calm, responsible. I always thought you were born like that. But now I'm starting to think you built yourself, and I want to understand how." Her question surprised me more than anything she'd said so far. People rarely ask how strength is made. They just assume it exists. "It wasn't one moment," I said slowly. "It was hundreds of small ones, some good, many painful." "I want to know," she said seriously. So I told her. Not everything, but enough. I told her about the days after Dad died, when I learned what real responsibility looked like. I told her about working jobs I hated just to keep the house afloat. I told her about the nights I cried quietly because I was exhausted, but nobody noticed. I told her about the times I wanted to leave but stayed anyway because I couldn't abandon them. I told her how strength is built through choices nobody sees. She didn't interrupt, not once. When I finished, she wiped her eyes. "I thought you were just cold," she whispered. "But really, you were tired." "Yes," I said. "Very." She leaned her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since we were young. "You shouldn't have had to do everything alone," she said. "I know," I replied, "but at the time, it felt like I didn't have a choice." "You do now," she whispered. Her voice shook slightly. "We're here. We're not perfect, but we're finally awake." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The silence said enough. A moment later, my brother came around the corner, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You two having a moment?" he asked. My sister didn't lift her head. "Yes," she said, "and don't ruin it." He smirked. "Fine, but when you're done, I need both of you." We exchanged a glance. "For what?" I asked. He pointed toward the shed. "Something's wrong with the water heater," he said. "I tried fixing it myself, but I think we need a team effort." The old version of him would have ignored it for months. The current version was asking for help and offering it at the same time. We followed him inside. For the next hour, we worked together. Not me leading while they watched, but all of us contributing. My sister held the flashlight. My brother handled the tools. I read the manual and instructions. We solved the issue with a level of cooperation I didn't think we were capable of. When the heater finally rumbled to life, my sister clapped. "We did it," she said, almost laughing. My brother looked proud, genuinely proud, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't the only one holding this family together anymore. Later in the evening, my mother called us into the living room. She held another folder, not legal documents this time, but something else. Old photos, ones I hadn't seen in years, ones she'd kept locked away because they made her hurt too much. She spread them out on the coffee table. Our childhood. Dad smiling, Mom laughing, us small and carefree, birthdays, holidays, ordinary days that felt special simply because we hadn't learned about responsibility yet. My mother exhaled softly. "I think I forgot who we used to be," she said, "but I want us to remember." My brother sat beside her. My sister leaned forward, studying every picture as if trying to reconstruct her own life. And me? I sat quietly, realizing something important. Strength wasn't something I needed to give up, but it wasn't something I needed to use to shield everyone anymore either. Now, it could be used differently. Shared strength, balanced strength, not a burden, a support. I looked at them, really looked, and saw a family that wasn't dependent anymore but rebuilding. Together. For once, I wasn't the teacher. I was learning too. The day everything shifted. The next day began with a feeling I couldn't immediately define. Not excitement, not fear. Something quieter than both. A sense of transition, the kind people feel right before their life changes direction. I couldn't explain it, but I felt it deeply. By mid-morning, the house was already alive with activity. My sister was on her second online job interview. My brother had left early to buy materials for a small repair project he insisted on finishing himself. My mother was reviewing the last of the household papers, organizing them into neat folders, something I never thought I'd see. The house wasn't just clean anymore. It was structured, disciplined, awake. For years, I had carried the weight of everything. Now it felt like the house itself was learning how to stand without leaning on me. But the shift inside the house wasn't what shook me. What shook me was the message I received at noon. A simple email, subject line, regarding your previous inquiry. It was from the company I had reached out to 3 months earlier, a large firm in another city, one that had shown interest in my work and invited me to consider a position there. At the time, I ignored it. I couldn't leave the house, not with everything falling apart around me. But now, things were not falling apart. They were rebuilding. I opened the email. They wanted to schedule a meeting. They wanted to discuss a relocation package. They wanted me. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Leaving had always been something I fantasized about in quiet moments when exhaustion felt like a second heartbeat, but I never thought it would become a real option. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I never believed I'd be free enough to choose. Suddenly, I wasn't sure what to do. I needed time to think. So I went for a walk. The neighborhood was warm and familiar, filled with details I hadn't noticed in months. The old elm tree at the corner, the cracked pavement that had never been repaired, the distant sound of children playing behind the school building. Everything looked the same, but I did not feel the same. As I walked, questions started unfolding in my mind. Was I ready to let go? Was the family ready for me to leave? Would the house survive without my constant presence? Would they? Would I? I turned the questions over and over, searching for an answer that didn't exist yet. Halfway down the road, I saw Mr. Peterson, an older neighbor who had lived there for decades, watering his plants. He waved. "You look thoughtful today," he said. "I received an important email," I replied. "A life-changing one." He tilted his head. "Good or bad?" "I'm not sure yet." He smiled knowingly. Big decisions always look like problems before they reveal themselves as opportunities. I almost laughed. "That sounds like something you'd find in a fortune cookie." He shrugged. "It's still true." We talked for a few minutes about work, about life, about how families change slowly until one day everything feels different. Before I left, he said one last thing. Children eventually leave the house. What matters is whether they leave guilt or hope behind. I walked away in silence, his words echoing in my mind. Guilt, hope. For years, my choices were driven by guilt. Now, hope was suddenly an option. When I returned home, my sister practically ran up to me. "I got a second interview," she said, breathless and glowing. Her excitement was contagious. "That's amazing," I said, meaning it. She hugged me, spontaneous, unplanned, then went back to her laptop. Next, my brother came in from the backyard, holding a piece of sandpaper and looking proud of himself. "You won't believe it," he said. "I fixed the entire back fence." "That's great." "I'm not done," he added. "I want to repaint it tomorrow. Make it look new." He wasn't doing it because it needed to be done. He was doing it because he wanted to contribute, truly contribute. Then my mother appeared from the hallway, carrying 2 freshly organized binders. "All the house documents are sorted," she announced. She looked tired but not overwhelmed. For the first time in years, she looked in control of her own life. I glanced at all of them, my family, my responsibility, my history, and something warm spread through my chest. They had changed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. I wasn't holding them up anymore. They were standing, together, without leaning on me. That's when I realized something. My staying had helped them rebuild, but my leaving might help them grow. The thought didn't scare me this time. It didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like evolution. I sat down at the kitchen table and reopened the email. My heart was steady. My decision wasn't final yet, but one thing was clear. For the first time in my adult life, the choice was truly mine, not driven by fear, not forced by dependency, not shaped by guilt, but offered by opportunity. I typed a reply. "Thank you for reaching out. Yes, I'm available for a meeting." My hand didn't shake, not even a little. As I hit send, I knew life was changing again, but this time on my terms. The choice. I never thought I'd make the meeting was scheduled for the next morning. Not an interview, a discussion. The kind of conversation companies only offer when they're already interested. I didn't tell anyone in the house about it that night, not because I wanted a secret, but because I needed space to think without shaping my thoughts around anyone else's expectations. For once, the decision was mine alone. I barely slept, not from anxiety, from anticipation. By sunrise, I was already dressed, sitting at the small desk in my room, waiting for the video call to begin. The house was still quiet, the kind of early morning silence that feels like the world is paused just for you. At exactly 7:30, the meeting started. The hiring director greeted me warmly. We went through the position details, the responsibilities, the relocation benefits, the salary, the opportunities for growth. It wasn't just a job. It was a life, a new one, being offered to me professionally, financially, emotionally. After nearly an hour, the director smiled. "We'd like you to join us," she said. "We believe you're exactly what we're looking for." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. Instead, I said the truth. "I need a week." She nodded. "Of course, take your time." The call ended. I closed my laptop, and then I sat there absolutely still as the enormity of the moment washed over me. I had always imagined what freedom might feel like. I imagined it would be loud, celebratory, overwhelming. Instead, it felt calm, quiet, steady, like I finally stepped into the life I had been preparing for without knowing it. When I walked into the kitchen, the family was already awake. My sister was reading something on her phone, and when she looked up, her whole face lit. "I got the job," she said softly, almost in disbelief. "They accepted me." The pride radiating off her was unmistakable. She looked taller somehow, as if carrying less guilt allowed her to stand straighter. "That's incredible," I said. She nodded, tears threatening but not falling. "I start next Monday." My brother came in next, tired but satisfied. "The fence is done," he announced. "The backyard looks almost new." He opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water. "I'm going to repaint the shed, too," he added. "It's ugly. I never noticed how ugly until now." He wasn't doing this for me. He was doing it for himself, because he wanted a house he could be proud of. Then came my mother carrying her reorganized binders like trophies. "All the paperwork is updated," she said. "I even made digital copies of everything. We've been living blind for too long." She sat down, breathing deeply. "I feel like I finally caught up with my life," she whispered. Everyone was growing. Everyone was taking responsibility, and that was the moment I realized. The house didn't need saving anymore, and neither did they. Now the only person left was me. That afternoon I stepped out into the backyard. The air smelled like fresh wood and new paint. The fence was smooth and clean. The space looked cared for, tended to with effort, not obligation. My brother was sitting on the grass, drinking water. He looked up at me. "You look like you've got something to say," he said. I nodded. "I might be moving." He blinked. "Moving? As in, moving out?" "Yes." His expression shifted. Confusion first, then surprise, then something deeper and quieter. "Because of the family?" he asked carefully. "No," I said, "because I finally can." He stared at the ground, thinking. "You know," he said slowly, "if you had told me this 3 months ago, I would have panicked. I would have begged you not to go. Or pretended I didn't care. But now—" He looked up again, meeting my eyes. "Now I'm proud of you." His words had weight, real weight. A few minutes later, my sister joined us outside. "What's going on?" she asked. My brother answered for me. "They offered a job, a real one." Her lips parted in surprise. "You're leaving?" "I'm considering it," I said. She stepped closer, her voice soft. "If you go, I'll miss you." Then a small smile. "But I'm not afraid anymore." It was the most mature thing she'd ever said to me. Then my mother appeared in the doorway, having overheard enough to understand. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. She didn't panic. Instead, she walked to me slowly, her face filled with sadness, but also pride. "You gave us everything you could," she said quietly, "and we took more than we should have." Her voice trembled slightly. "But we're standing now. You helped us get here. And if life is calling you somewhere else, go." I swallowed hard. For years, I believed that leaving would break them. But hearing my mother say that, honestly, without guilt, made me realize something. Leaving wouldn't break them now. Staying might break me. She placed her hand on my cheek. "You deserve your own life," she whispered. And for the first time in decades, I felt like she meant it. That evening, the house felt different. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't tense. It wasn't dependent. It was stable. And I was finally free to imagine something beyond its walls. The future no longer looked like a distant dream. It looked possible, real, near. All that remained was one last chapter, one last conversation, one last decision, not about them, about me, the house I left standing, and the life I finally chose. The week passed slowly, but not with the heaviness I expected. Every day felt like a quiet rehearsal for a life I had only watched from a distance, not rushed, not forced, just unfolding, naturally, finally, honestly. I spent time with each family member, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My sister went to her first day of work with a confidence that surprised even her. My brother began repairing things I had ignored for years, not out of duty, but out of pride. My mother rediscovered routines she once abandoned, cooking thoughtfully, organizing, caring for herself. The house had changed, and because of that, I was ready to as well. The final conversation. On the 7th night, we gathered in the living room. No dramatic announcement, no tension, just the four of us, the way we used to be, but better. I made my decision, I said. My mother was the first to nod. She'd been expecting this. My brother leaned forward, elbows on his knees. My sister folded her hands tightly, bracing herself. I'm taking the job, I said. Silence followed. Not shocked silence, but meaningful silence. A silence filled with acceptance. Then my sister stood up, walked to me, and wrapped her arms around my shoulders. I'm proud of you, she whispered. My brother got up next. He didn't hug me. Instead, he placed a steady hand on my back. You were our strength long enough, he said. Now go build something for yourself. My mother took my hand. Your father would have smiled today, she said softly, not because you're leaving, but because you're finally choosing you. Her voice didn't crack with sadness. It trembled with pride. That was the moment I knew. Leaving wasn't abandoning them. It was honoring everything we all had survived. The last morning in the house. The morning I packed my last bag, sunlight filled every corner of the home. Warm, soft, forgiving. I walked through each room one last time. The living room where we argued and reconciled. The kitchen where my sister had finally learned to cook. The backyard my brother transformed with his own hands. The hallway where my mother had cried silently for years, now finally quiet. And the bedroom where I had learned, painfully and slowly, how to become strong. I paused at the front door. My family stood behind me, not clinging, not breaking down, not begging me to stay, just standing, stable, ready. My brother stepped forward with a small key in his hand. The house is yours, he said, but we'll take care of it now. You don't have to worry anymore. My sister nodded. We'll make you proud. My mother squeezed my arm. You already made us proud. Now it's your turn. I smiled, a full, genuine smile I hadn't felt in years. Then I opened the door and stepped out, not running, not escaping, not fleeing responsibility, just moving forward. The first hour of my new life. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rear-view mirror, but for the first time, it didn't feel like I was losing something. It felt like I was becoming something. At the stoplight, I realized something simple, but enormous. Strength isn't about carrying others. Real strength is knowing when to let yourself live. My phone buzzed. A message from the hiring director. Welcome aboard. We're excited to have you. I breathed in deeply. A new city, a new job, a new chapter, a life that was finally mine. 1 year later,